on YouTube. For the technical difficulties, we are back online. Mr. Secretary, the consent agenda, please.
Mr. Chairman, there are 9 items on today's consent agenda. Items number 1 and 2 are from Patriot Energy Group, LLC. The first is a notification of name change. The second is a notification of upstream ownership change. Item number 3 is a notification of bankruptcy from Talon Energy Marketing, LLC. Item number 4, notification of upstream ownership change from Emex, LLC. Items number 5 to 9 are revised tariff pages regarding access charge reform from Verizon Maryland LLC, XO Communication Services LLC, Metropolitan Telecommunications of Maryland Inc., DBA MetTel, MCI Metro Access Transmission Services LLC, and Armstrong Telephone Company.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, I would move that with respect to items number 1, 2, 3, and 4, that we note the filing. With respect to items number 5, 6, 8, and 9, that we accept the tariff provisions for filing with an effective date of July 1st, 2022. And with respect to item number 7, I move that we accept the tariff provisions for filing with the correction recommended by staff in its comments dated June 22nd, 2022, with an effective date of July 1st, 2022, and direct the company, Metropolitan Telecommunications of Maryland, to file clean copies of the tariff provisions. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motions are approved. Mr. Secretary, the administrative agenda.
Mr. Chairman, item number 10 concerns renewable energy contracts and West Rock Company.
Thank you. If counsel for item number 10 can approach. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning, Your Honor. Peter Wilson, on behalf of the...
Counsel for West Rock, if you could take the podium to your right, please.
Starting again. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Peter Wilson on behalf of staff. On April 22nd, the West Rock Company filed a request with the Commission asking if 3 contracts with third parties for the future sale of RECs would be recognized as valid by the Commission. This request originally in its entirety was designated confidential. West Rock agreed to remove that designation from its filing except for the contracts themselves so that this matter could be open to the public. And I'd like to add to my comments mail log 241158, which is that confidential, public non-confidential filing. The West Rock RECs were to be generated from black liquor, a byproduct of West Rock-owned paper mills in Virginia and North Carolina. West Rock's black liquor had previously been certified for RECs in Maryland and is currently certified for RECs in Virginia for all 4 of its mills and for one of those mills in Delaware. The contracts in question were all executed in late September 2021 and were for yearly sales of black liquor RECs in the future, extending sales for each of those contracts, one to 2023, one into 2025, and one into 2026. On May 30th, 2020, the Maryland legislature had enacted Senate Bill 65, amending PUA Sections 7701 and 7704 of Maryland's Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard to expressly exclude black liquor as a qualified biomass eligible to receive RECs in the Maryland program. As of May 30th, 2021, the statute provides that Maryland will continue to recognize black liquor RECs until October 1, 2021, but not thereafter, and will not recognize them in subsequent years. The statute also expressly provides that as of June 1, 2021, it will not impair any contracts already in existence on June 1, 2021. Effectively grandfathering contracts for black liquor recs made before House Bill 65's enactment, but extending beyond the October 1, 2021 cutoff date. The plain language of Senate Bill 65 accomplishes the legislature's intent to end black liquor recs in Maryland while complying with the constitutional strictures on impairing existing private contracts. Senate Bill 65 does not create a 5-month window for paper mills to enter new contracts privately extending Maryland black liquor recs to future years past 2021. The black liquor prohibition date. But that is precisely what White Rock is suggesting here. To reach this conclusion, White Rock, as expressed in its attachments to its request, ignores the plain language of Senate Bill 65, ignores its enactment as law on May 30th, 2021, conflates the effective date of the grandfather clause with the October end date for black liquor recs recognition, and ignores the intention of the legislature to prohibit black liquor recs as of October 2021. All three of the White Rock black liquor contracts were executed nearly 5 months after the enactment of Senate Bill 65, too late to be grandfathered past 2021. They were entered with knowledge that black liquor would no longer qualify for Maryland recs only days after their execution. Staff recommends that the Commission find West Rock's contracts for black liquor recs invalid under the Maryland Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard Program. This recommendation is in accord with the public statement issued by the Commission's Executive Secretary and attached to staff's comment as Exhibit 2, which requires proof of a contract existing before June 1, 2021 for any black liquor rec sales after September 30th, 2021. It is also in accord with the plain language of the statute and the legislature's intent.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I believe you referred to the company numerous times as White Rock. I think I introduced the case as Black Rock. It's actually West Rock Company.
Black Rock, yeah.
It is West Rock.
Well, we'll turn to counsel for West Rock Company. If you could please make an appearance.
Thank you. Douglas Gansler for West Rock. I actually agree with everything that was said regarding the facts of this case. It's the language and the statutory legislative intent that is clearly at odds with the delivery. West Rock's been delivering recs to the PJM GATS, and they've been accepted over time. This Senate Bill 65 was indeed passed to extinguish the use of black liquor as a Tier 1 source here in Maryland, and that had been some time in the doing. But and this particular issue is interesting because it doesn't affect any other companies or any other contracts of which I'm aware. I think it's just this one company and those three contracts. But it's important to the company because they read the statute, and it seems relatively, well, it seems completely unambiguous, and they followed that statute in making these contracts. So were the commission to rule against them, it would be at great cost to the company. And I guess I'll start, Mr. Wilson talked about the legislative history in the plain language. I'll start with the legislative history. This is of SB 65, Department of Legislative Services, regarding this issue. It says, quote, at the very beginning, the bill also, 1, excludes black liquor or any product derived from black liquor from Tier 1 beginning with the 22 compliance year, and 2, continues Tier 2 in perpetuity at 2.5% beginning with the 2021 compliance year. A presently existing obligation or contract may write of contract right may not be impaired in any way by the bill. And then in the original in bold, it says, the bill generally takes effect June 1, 2021, except for the provisions related to black liquor, which take effect October 1, 2021. It's there, and the DLS, Department of Legislative Services, chose to actually put it in bold were there to be any ambiguity. In fact, West Rock sought clarification because there was some word from the lawyer, the commission's lawyer, that there was a different interpretation. So we sought, there was a letter written on July 2nd, 2021 to the PSC seeking a clarification, and that was, we never heard back. But there was a continued concern by West Rock, and they want to play by the rules and make sure that everything is done right here, which is why we sought this hearing, to get that clarification, to make sure that those contracts will still be honored. And so we wrote a letter March 21st and of this year, 2022, and it talks about the 5 sections in the bill. And the first section revises the requirement and designation for Tier 2 renewable energy in the RPS. That's not at issue here. Section 2 redefines qualifying biomass to explicitly exclude black liquor, thus making it ineligible for RECs under the RPS. So that's number 2. Number 3 talks about, as was mentioned, the clause, the constitutional contract clause here, which says that, and I quote, a presently existing obligation or contract a contract right may not be impaired in any way by this act. So it does not define, though, when the, quote, presently existing contract right is determined. That would be the 2 operative dates being June 1st or October 1st. But Section 4 says, sets the implementation timeline for the black liquor amendment, providing that, quote, Section 2, which is where it gets dropped down, of this act shall take effect October 1, 2021, and shall apply to all renewable energy portfolio standard compliance years beginning January 1, 2022 or later. So right there it says that it shall, Section 2, which is the reduction of black liquor, takes effect October 1st, and the final section, Section 5, establishes that everything that establishes an implementation timeline for Tier 2 renewable amendments by stating that, quote, except as provided in Section 4, which is the October 1 deadline of this act shall take effect June 1, 2021. So it's clear that the act takes effect on June 1, 2021, except for the black liquor reduction, which is said not only by the legislative services, but in the statute itself. So there's no ambiguity. It's not really clear why we're here. It's hard to understand, to discern some other reading of October 1st not being October 1st. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Counsel. You stated at the outset that there's no issues of fact and dispute, and it does not appear that there are any. So it's strictly a matter of statutory interpretation. We have one enactment date associated with this Senate Bill 65, and it contains 2 effective dates, June 1st and October 1st, with respect to different portions of this Senate bill. Mr. Wolson, what does the June 1st effective date apply to? Mr. Gansler is arguing that there's effectively a carve-out with respect to the extinguishing or the transition away from black liquor as a qualifying biomass fuel.
Well,
and then the bill states that everything else is subject to this October 1st date. So can you explain staff's interpretation of what the June 1st effective date applies to?
well, as far as being the statute itself was enacted on May
May 30th.
30th. And it sets up a schedule. The schedule is October 1, black liquor will no longer be recognized and as qualified. And on June 1, the rest of the statute, which specifically is this grandfather clause. So The Constitution disallows interference with pre-existing contracts. So the legislature essentially said, as of June 1, if there's an existing contract, that will be honored for black liquor in the future, even past October 1. But other than that, October 1 was enacted as the scheduled date for the end of black liquor recs as of May 30th.
Mr. Chairman, I think I can answer that question for you if you'd like. It's there are a lot of things that were changed in Senate Bill 65. Amongst of import would be the renewable energy portfolio standards were changed. The percentages were changed. For example, I'll just pick one out of random. At least it used to be 8.5%, and then it was changed to 5.5% derived from solar energy. And if you go through it, it looks like a lot of it is affecting solar energy, and it's just changing the percentages within the renewable resources. And there's a lot of other language that was changed, including wind projects and other things, including the amount per kilowatt hour shortfall required.
And this is all with respect to Section 1.
This is all respect to the Senate Bill 65.
Section 1 of Senate Bill 65?
Yeah.
Okay. Does Section 1, is it really at issue in our discussion this morning?
Not at all. The only thing it's hard to, doesn't seem like it's an issue, but the only thing we're discussing is whether October 1st means October 1st regarding black liquor.
Right. We have sections 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are the operative sections here, and
Yes.
it appears that West Rock is interpreting it one way very clearly, and staff views this very differently with respect to this 4-month gap period, let me say, between June 1st and October 1st. Mr. Gansler, was it the intent of the legislature to effectively create a 4-month grace period to allow black liquor suppliers to enter into new contracts that would extend beyond October 1st?
Clearly it was, and I guess I'm not in the legislature, but it clearly was, since they put it in bold letters. This, black liquor, I believe, was recognized as a Tier 1 source since 1994. I may have that correct, but it goes back a while, and there was a lot of discussion, which I happen to remember, not that I was involved in, but I do remember this was an issue, and so my guess would be that because there was so much, there's a reliance on black liquor, and then the paper mill closed in Lute, that they wanted to give it more time to sort of almost unravel, if you will, from decades of use of black liquor. That's only sort of justification, but it's regardless of the sort of the reason behind it, the fact that it's in italics, it's in bold, it says the bill generally takes effect June 1st, 2021, except for the provisions related to black liquor, which take effect October 1, 2021. It seems clear that they did want to give that short window. And it's interesting, I guess, I asked this because I was wondering, how big of an issue is this? Are there going to be a bunch of companies coming before the commission saying, well, we had these contracts, and there aren't, for whatever reason, and we're talking about 3 contracts that go into the next few years, but it's hard to imagine any other interpretation of this. And I guess I would ask, I don't want to ask counsel, but what else would October 1st mean in this bill if it doesn't mean what it says it means?
I'll ask counsel. Mr. Wilson, we have the 4-month period. This, I'll refer to it as a gap period. I don't want to put a particular spin on this. Number one, Mr. Gansler just asked, to staff's knowledge, are there any other contracts in this universe that were executed in the 4-month window? Are you aware of any?
Not aware of any others, and that's probably because the other companies realized what this law actually says.
Okay. We don't need speculation.
Yeah.
We don't need speculation, but I'm not aware of any other contracts before the commission at this time. Counsel for West Rock is stating that it's fully appropriate per the statute for black liquor suppliers to execute new contracts in this window. You're stating that it was not the intent of the legislature. The legislature made clear that contracts entered into on or after June 1st are invalid. What is your interpretation of that October 1st effective date? Let's say a contract was signed in the spring of 2021. How would SB 65 impact that contract? What would happen to that contract on October 1st?
If a contract was entered, it was limited to be effective until October 1st as far as black liquor is concerned. So if they had entered a contract for black liquor recs on June 2nd that ran to black liquor recs running to October 1, that would have been valid. But not past October 1. As of May 30th, they were on notice that black liquor recs would no longer be honored after October 1, with one exception, and that is if there was a pre-existing contract on June 1. So the period in between gave them an opportunity to sell their black liquor recs for the period up until October 1, but not thereafter.
And that's what I'm trying to get at, the existence, the reason the legislature created two effective dates and what would occur in that transition. Looking at Section 3, which states, quote, that a presently existing obligation or contract right may not be impaired in any way by this act. You interpret the term presently existing as of June 1st?
Yes, that's because in Section 5, it says that except for as provided in Section 4 of this act shall take effect June 1. And that's in Section 3, which is not Section 4, so, yes.
There is an interesting interplay between Sections 2, 3, 4, and 5. I admit the legislature could have been more clear here. I'll turn to my colleagues for additional questioning of counsel, starting with Commissioner Linden.
Can I just respond to that, though?
Yeah, yes,
I think it's, as somebody who reviewed thousands of these every year, I think this is actually fairly clear in its intent. But the only thing I would just say, Mr. Chairman, you said a new contract. You know, these contracts aren't made like you call yesterday and they're made today. These contracts were in the works for some time, which is why the October 1st date would be important, so that they wouldn't have to rush to do that. They were on notice, it's true. They were on notice because Section 4 does say October 1st. The only justification, which I just heard, for October 1st being there, I think this is what he was saying, is that the October 1st date would apply to any contract that, say, was done in May of 2021. It would have to expire by October of 2021, and I don't know that there's a lot of contracts that are that short term in this space, but there may be. I'm not an expert in the area, but I think the actual English interpretation, plain language, and the interpretation by legislative services would make a lot more common sense here.
Actually, any contract made in May would have been grandfathered.
So, which makes the October 1st date, again, inapplicable to their interpretation.
Although Mr. Wilson just said May, not June.
Right.
So those May contracts would be grandfathered. Mr. Gansler, would these contracts be grandfathered in perpetuity?
Yeah, yes, that's what the statute says, but I mean, I think that my understanding is these are typically 3 or 4 year contracts, but I think, and that's the point, if it were done before June 1st, it would be in perpetuity by everybody's interpretation, which again leaves that dangling problem of what's October 1st mean if it doesn't mean what it says it means.
So you stated if a contract was executed before June 1st, that contract would remain in perpetuity, but if that contract was executed in the transition period,
It's still in perpetuity.
in perpetuity.
As to black liquor only, because that's what the statute carves out.
So your position is that with respect to these contracts, June 1st doesn't apply here? It'll be in perpetuity whether it's signed before June 1st or
Before October 1st.
before October 1st?
As to black liquor, yes, that's what the statute explicitly, indisputably, dispositively states.
And that's what I'm disputing.
That's evident. I'll turn to my colleagues. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning,
Morning.
to the parties. So I wanted to make sure I was following along with this. And I'll start with counsel for West Rock. You mentioned that, to your knowledge, and I believe the staff counsel also agreed, there's just the four contracts that we're looking at, three contracts
Yes.
that we're looking here at today. And to your knowledge, there aren't any other companies that could potentially be impacted by this. So, as of right now, just also to clarify, these recs haven't been approved by the commission.
My understanding is they've been delivered to PJM GATS, as they have year after year after year after year, but they're in limbo. They've not been delivered to the utilities at this point, is my understanding. And they're trying to do, if someone had told them this was, like, it was clear that October 1st didn't mean October 1st, they wouldn't have entered into the contracts. Everybody was following the law and reading the statute, so they did enter. They completed the sort of commission of those contracts that were in the works.
Okay, so, and you're not requesting necessarily that we do anything other than to review and confirm that the contracts are still valid
That's correct.
as of today?
Yeah, that's correct, because obviously the issue is they keep delivering them, they keep getting accepted, and then one day, next year, the year after, they say, they said, we're not going to accept those anymore, and that would be a great loss to the other company that they have the contract with, and as well to West Rock, and they just wanted clarification, because it's hard to, I mean, I can usually see both sides. I can't see the other side of this issue, and I can't imagine whoever was reading this could either, but since there's some discussion within staff at the commission that there's a different reading of this statute, we're here because we actually reached out to seek clarification to make sure that that would not happen down the road, that the statute means what the statute says.
Right, so there is some risk on the company's part in the sense that, I had a chance to review the contracts, and I won't go into any detail, but as most contracts do, there is a requirement that for both parties, that any regulatory approvals have to be approved and accepted and obtained.
Right, and it hasn't been unapproved, but there's a concern that it would be, and we're hearing why that concern is valid as to West Rock and the companies that it contracted with. We don't understand it, but we're here because we want to make sure we do it right.
Okay, so let's follow up on the comment you made towards the closing of your response to questions from the chairman. And you mentioned that the General Assembly, as part of its deliberations for this piece of legislation, was at least aware of the fact that West Rock was in the midst of,
Two things, yeah.
we're all tainted with it now, that there was at least some awareness of the fact that there might be some ongoing discussion. Is that your characterization of it?
They were aware that the bill was being considered by the General Assembly for sure, and there were a lot of people lobbying, I'm sure, one side or the other. I don't happen to know whether West Rock was amongst them, but even assuming they were, to get an effective date or to fight against moving it out of Tier 1. They lost, whoever was arguing that lost that battle. It is now forever not in Tier 1. The question is when, you've been doing this for decades under having black liquor be part of Tier 1. When do you need to stop? When is that going to stop? And there was a concern, which actually, interestingly, in Section 3 was delineated, was put in the bill. You don't need to, it's typically not in the bill. I mean, it's a contract clause issue. You can't infringe upon an existing contract. And so they put it in this bill to make sure that no one does that, and that's what we're here for today.
Okay, so West Rock was part of the process. They were aware of what was happening in the General Assembly, And as you mentioned earlier, the General Assembly was at least aware of the fact that West Rock had they were engaged to some extent.
Oh, I don't know if
but
the
you don't-
General Assembly was aware of West Rock's contractual relationships. I would
Okay.
guess they were not. I mean, that's not usually something that comes up in the General Assembly, who's got contracts with whom about what. But there might have been some concern, and I just wasn't there, but there might have been some consideration which led to the later effective date for black liquor of the fact that this has been going for decades, and it would take a little extra time to unwind that, as opposed to the rest of the bill, which took effect in June, which is around different portfolio percentage standards, which is easier to accomplish, I would think.
So I guess that kind of helps bring me to one of the questions that I have regarding this matter is the contracts were signed after the session closed.
Well, as would all contracts before June, between whatever the date was, April 12th, somewhere around there is usually when the General Assembly adjourns for sine die, and then June 1st. So those contracts also, which no one's contesting would be valid, would have also been signed after the General Assembly adjourned.
So why would and perhaps you can help me understand this, why would the General Assembly create a grandfathering clause or an exception for contracts that have not been signed?
Well, that would go to Section 3, because if they were, a company could, I mean, this is complete speculation, but a company could argue that they spent 3 years, discussing the terms of the contract, what have you, and then all of a sudden the General Assembly says, oh, by the way, tomorrow, you can't, that contract's invalid. They're like, well, how do we know? And so they give them a runway to June 1st for all parts of the bill except for black liquor, which they explicitly set aside and said, we're going to give you a little bit of longer runway until October 1st for those particular contracts. Because black liquor, is my understanding, is the only thing that was moved from Tier 1 to Tier 2 in SB 65. So it's a little bit of a different animal than the rest of the bill, if you will.
So it's not West Rock's position then that the General Assembly was creating this we'll call it an exception, a grandfathering, carve-out, whatever language you like to use, that was being created for the contracts that are in front of us today.
Correct. It was created for any contracts involving black liquor up until, from any company. That'd be another constitutional problem if they sort of targeted a company. So they were doing it for any company that was using black liquor as part of the portfolio standard under Tier 1 up to October 1st. Now, no one can do it after that at all.
Okay.
And that's where we sit today, so that can't happen again.
Okay. So I'll see time at this point, Mr. Chairman, and see if any other commissioners have any questions. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Gansler.
Commissioner Richard.
I think for the most part, my questions have been asked and answered. But just to be clear, you're not contesting that it was the intent of the legislature to cease to end using black liquor as part of the RPS.
Oh, it absolutely was the
Okay.
intent of the legislature to cease using black liquor as part of the, but beginning October 1st. I mean, it's not only the intent, it's the explicit language they use, but
Okay.
both things.
Right, and
Yeah.
at that, as recently, the only source of black liquor in Maryland was from that Luke paper mill. Is that correct?
Created in Maryland, but yes, that is my understanding. The paper mill is now closed, but this affects black liquor that it was taken from other states and would be, as has always
Understood.
been. Yeah.
But there is no more a source of black liquor in Maryland now that the Luke
That is
paper
correct,
mill is
yes.
closed. And this is an issue that has been before the legislature
For
over
years.
a number of years.
Yes.
And it was, discussed that whether this was consistent with Maryland's policies, the reasons for its RPS. But it was this year, intent to cease usage of black liquor after the Luke paper mill closed. Is that correct?
Organically produced black liquor in the state of Maryland, yes. But it was the intent of the legislature, as is clearly stated here in bold, that they can be delivered, accepted and delivered here in Maryland until October 1st. But it solves, I mean,
I understand.
I think we're on the same page. But yes,
Okay.
the issue that was before the legislature.
Right, and I was just trying to understand exactly why you think the legislature would have created this gap when it was clear it was the intent of the legislature to cease using black liquor, why they would want to leave this loophole.
Well, there's
Which clearly there are very few sources of black liquor. These sources were actively lobbying against this legislation and to HR 6, or not HR, it was SB 65. So again, I'm having a hard time seeing the logic that the legislature, as you're seeing it, would have included this gap and, provided the opportunity for these very few companies outside of Maryland to again, extend contracts which would foil the whole purpose of SB 65.
Yeah. So there's a few things. One thing is we could conjecture all day long what the General Assembly was thinking and which lobbyist was paid the most to do whatever. But the issue was whether or not we wanted to produce black liquor in Maryland. The answer was no to the legislature, so they stopped producing it, and the paper mill closed anyway. So that issue is sort of off the table. The intent of the General Assembly is crystal clear here, that the operative date was going to be October 1st, because that's why they put it in the bill, and that's why they bolded it in talking about the intent. Sort of in the bill itself, and this is what I was just alluding to through an earlier question, it talks about the contract clause of the United States Constitution and Maryland's Constitution, frankly, in Section 3, and the reason why you would do that is, I would again guess, that there was a concern that companies that were engaged in contractual relationships over a long period of time would need time to unwind that relationship and not go forward as they had for years and years and years in delivering and having those accepted in GATT. So I guess with others, I don't know that it matters why they picked October 1st. I would submit, I was very involved, for example, in getting chicken litter to Energy to be a Tier 1 source. That was my thing I was pushing at the time. If they decided not to have that in Tier 1 and make that into Tier 2, I would imagine they'd give a longer runway for that, because it's a product that had been over time considered to be a Tier 1 source. Now it's Tier 2. Instead of having the legislature, General Assembly adjourn in middle of April and say, well, now you've got to unwind all those contracts by June 1st, it's a little different than the rest of the statute. That's why I was saying it's an animal unto itself. It's moving up something from Tier 1 to Tier 2. The General Assembly may feel consistent with Section 3, which is the constitutional clause, that they need to give them more time.
Okay, just last question.
Sure.
Was it within the authority of the General Assembly to have created a June 1st, 2021 effective date, knowing that the bill itself would go into effect in October of that year?
Well, the bill
Is that an authority, and is that a recognized right of the legislature?
Yes, and they did that. So they did it effective June 1st with the one exception of the black liquor, and they had the authority to do both. And they clearly delineated that authority and made it crystal clear as to that they were doing that. So they had the authority to do that. Now, if they, there could be arguments made, and there, let's say there could be arguments made that had they said, okay, we adjourn, I'm just using, I don't know the date, April 12th, and this is going to become effective April 13th, that there would be some serious contract clause problems that other companies would have raised as well, because of the contract clause. So you can't do that. You can't just say, tomorrow we're going to do it. So they gave time for all of it, and they gave more time for the more difficult ones to unwind, which is something these companies have been relying on black liquor recs for decades, and they gave them more time, just a few months to unwind it, and everyone operated under those rules.
Understood. Okay, so the answer is yes, that June 1st
Yes,
is an
absolutely.
authorized date that
course.
the legislature had the authority to set. Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Bubar.
Thank you. I had similar questions that Commissioner Richard just asked, so thank you. But just wanted to understand your interpretation. Section 3 says that a presently existing obligation or contract right may not be impaired in any way by this act. But it's my understanding that these were not presently existing contracts, these were contracts that were signed later. So I was trying to understand the interpretation of that language.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the constitutional language, which is, so they use "or" because a presently existing obligation could be, a contract that two sides are entered into a contract, it's oral, it hasn't been committed to writing, there's different arguments that can be made, which is, sort of, it's part of the argument that we would be making, but it's the third part here, that is a constitutional problem with this, because they had the legislature, and I think this goes to Commissioner Richards' question, had the legislature said this is going to be in effect June 1st, and it wasn't Section 4 as specifically saying black liquor is going to be October 1st, then they would have had to have done whatever they're going to do. It would have had to been June 1st, but they explicitly say it's not, and so there's a contract. The way the contract clause, frankly, would come up in this context right now is if the commission were to say, you know what, you're wrong, West Rock. We don't know what October 1st was. We don't care what the legislative intent was that is stated here. We don't care what the statute says. We're going to say these contracts aren't valid. Then you have a constitutional contract clause problem because of the plain language of the statute and the clearly set forth legislative intent. This isn't one of these things where we've been talking about what was the legislature thinking. It says it right here what they were thinking, and they put it in bold. And so that's why the contract clause problem would come up if the commission were to decide against West Rock. That would be an argument that could be made if it were to be made. But right now, it doesn't seem like there's a real argument on the other side regarding the statute or the statutory interpretation or the legislative interpretation. If that makes sense, that might have been too much lawyerly chatter, but
Yeah, I understand.
yeah.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, counsel. Both of you argue that the statute and the legislative intent is crystal clear.
I don't think they do.
Oh, yes, we do. Yeah.
Staff makes clear that they believe that the statute is clear with respect to their position. Mr. Gansler, I do appreciate the fact that the legislative history, as you noted multiple times in bold, states that the bill generally takes effect June 1st, 2021, except for the provision related to black liquor, which take effect October 1st, 2021. So it's effectively a carve-out with respect to the black liquor. So I agree with you there. It may be speculation that the 4-month period was created out of generosity by the legislature to create this runway for contracts that may have been contemplated prior to June 1st, but they needed another month or 3 months to execute. That is compelling, but then when that is dicta, that is language from the Department of Legislative Services. You then take a look at Section 3, which goes back to the statement that says that the legislation will not abrogate existing contracts, quote, that a presently existing obligation or contract right may not be impaired in any way. I'm having trouble reconciling your argument, which I would say is not unreasonable, with the statute before us as signed by the governor and enacted. I believe that Section 3 effectively limits application of the removal of the black liquor qualification for Maryland recs, and I do agree with staff's position that these 3 contracts from your client would be invalid under the letter of SB 65. I'm going to propose to my colleagues that we find that the company's submitted renewable energy contracts are invalid pursuant to the Maryland Renewable Energy Standard Program, and I'll call a vote on that motion, beginning with Commissioner Bubar.
I agree.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner Richard? Aye. I vote aye. The motion is approved, Mr. Gansler, the commission will issue a memorandum to follow, of which you'll have an opportunity to review and appeal if necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, item number 11 is a request from Siemens Industry, Inc. for approval of the SEM3 electric meter.
Do we have counsel for Siemens? Seeing none, Mr. Spiegelman.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Spiegelman on behalf of staff. This item concerns a request by Siemens Industry filed on May 12, 2022 for approval of SEM3 model solid state electric meter manufacturing by Siemens for electric submetering applications. Public Utility Article Section 7-301A requires a person to gain Commission authorization before use of gas or electric meter, and PUA Section 7-303D4 Romanet 1 and Romanet 2 state that all submeter equipment is subject to any regulations and standards adopted by the Commission for accuracy testing and record keeping of gas and electric company meters. Comar 20.25.01.04a further requires that, first, all submeters installed in compliance with these regulations be of a type and class to properly and accurately register electrical consumption. Second, the meter type and design shall meet all applicable provisions of the latest edition of the American National Standard for Electric Meters, Code for Electric Meters, the NZ C12 standards. And third, that any submeter installed for billing purposes be approved by the Commission. In present filing, Siemens has provided documentation that this meter has been tested and confirmed to all applicable NZ C12 standards for electric meters as required by Comar. In addition, SEM3 is already approved by New York and California Public Service Commission and also by California Department of Food and Agriculture, Division of Measurement Standards. Therefore, staff recommends that the Commission approve Siemens' request to approve SEM3 model solid-state energy meter manufactured by Siemens Industry for electric submetering application. If approved, staff will update the list of approved devices located on PSC website. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegelman. Do you commissioners have questions on this item? Seeing none, I would move that we grant the company's request to approve the SEM3 model solid-state electric meter manufactured by Siemens for electric submetering applications. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved.
Mr. Chairman, item number 12 is an updated supplier coordination tariff from the Potomac Edison Company to implement seamless moves.
Good morning, Mr. Hoppick. We hear you loud and clear. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Filed updated supplier coordination tariff pages with new tariff language in order to implement seamless moves for retail electric suppliers as required by the legislature in Senate Bill 79. Working with PE, staff proposed and the company agreed to select changes to their initial tariff filing. These proposed changes are presented in Appendix A in staff's comments. The PC44 Competitive Markets and Customer Choice Working Group submitted a report and referenced consensus business plan to implement seamless moves as presented in Appendix B in staff's comments. The proposed tariff language, as revised by staff, is generally consistent with the referenced consensus business plan. Through communication with the company, it came to staff's attention that Potomac Edison will be freezing accounts upon initiation of a seamless move request made by a customer. This means that after the customer's supplier is notified of a seamless move through an 814 move transaction on electronic communication, other suppliers will not be able to enroll the customer until the move is completed, which can be up to 90 days prior to the date of the move. It is staff's understanding that PE's method of implementing seamless moves with customer accounts frozen to new enrollments was discussed and improved in the Competitive Markets and Customer Choice Working Group. Potomac Edison filed a letter requesting a waiver of Code of Maryland Regulations, or COMAR, sections 20530402 A, B, and C, which require that a retail electric supplier be able to enroll in a customer, be able to process that enrollment within 3 days, and drop the customer's previous supplier following the initiation of a new enrollment. Specifically, Potomac Edison is requesting a waiver of the requirement to enroll a customer with another supplier within 3 days of receiving an enrollment transaction from the time the customer's existing supplier is sent a 814 move transaction until the customer's move is completed and the existing retail supplier is transferred to the customer's new address. Staff believes that if PE is granted a waiver of COMAR 20.53.04.02 A and B, that a waiver of COMAR 2053.04.02C is not required, because with PE's freezing of the customer's account until the seamless move is completed, another supplier will not be able to enroll the customer. Thus, there will be no enrollment to trigger the requirement of COMAR 2053.04.02C. Staff therefore recommends that the Commission grant Potomac Edison's waiver request of COMAR 2053.04.02 A and B. Staff has reviewed the Potomac Edison tariff filings and processes and recommends that the Commission accept the proposed tariff as revised by staff and will require PE to file clean copies of its tariff. Staff also recommends that the Commission grant Potomac Edison's requested waiver of COMAR 20.53.04.02 A and B. Staff is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppick. Counsel for the utility.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Jeffrey Trout for the Potomac Edison Company. First of all, we agree with staff's analysis and recommendation. Specifically, we agree with the tweaks to the tariff language that staff has recommended, and we would, if the Commission grants the motions this morning, be prepared to make a compliance filing in exactly that manner. Secondly, for the reasons that Mr. Hoppick explained, I am now persuaded that I was being overcautious when I requested a waiver with respect to A, B, and C, that C was unnecessary because, as Mr. Hoppick explained, it's only triggered by a valid enrollment, and under these circumstances there would not be a valid enrollment. So I agree with staff's recommendation that the waiver be confined to A and B, and I would further just underline that this is a limited waiver. It is limited only to the circumstances where there is a pending seamless moves application by a customer. In all other circumstances, we would intend to, we would be able to, and we would intend to comply with those COMAR requirements. And then finally, I want to just thank, first of all, Mr. Chen and the other members of the work group, but particularly Mr. Chen for leading the work group, for leading us to a relatively smooth and relatively quick resolution of all these seamless moves issues. And I'd like to thank staff for their close attention to all of this, including the tweaks to the tariff language. I will close by adding one point for Commissioner O'Donnell, who is not here but may watch the tape, and that is, yes, we did reach out to OPC and to the retail suppliers about whether they had any issues with the changes to the filed tariff language. That was done last week. I think it was done concurrent with or before the staff filed their buck sheet. We showed, the staff sent an email copying us and then copying OPC and the retail supplier representatives who were active in the work group, showing the proposed changes, soliciting any comments. No feedback was received, is my understanding, and of course, those parties are not here today, nor did they lodge any objections in the record. So I think we've made a pretty clear record with respect to this case that there is no objection to these changes.
Thank you, Mr. Trout. Thank you for the recognition of the hard work of all the CMCC work group members and the leadership of Mr. Chen. I think he'll have something about seamless moves on his tombstone. Let me ask you this. I was on record not being the biggest fan of this concept here, but it's now been enacted. We're moving forward with it. What percentage of your residential customers in your service territory are using an electric retail supplier?
Somewhere between 10 and 20%. It varies from month to month. I think it may be in the lower end of that range at the moment.
All right, thank you. Do my colleagues have any questions?
Just a quick one. Mr. Hoppick, I took note that in the previous filings and the filings today for seamless moves, one, of course, we are doing this, as the chairman indicated, as it's a requirement of the legislature. You state that staff at this point is not taking any position on cost recovery. When will that recommendation be made? Is that in the context of a rate case? Is that staff's intention?
I think it depends on how and when the utilities request recovery. Potomac Edison's data request responses indicated that they might seek recovery through the POR process.
POR, okay.
So staff would presumably weigh in that instance. I believe some of the Exelon utilities, subject to check, mention base rates, so that would arise in whichever rate case they included those costs.
Okay, no, thanks for that. And I've just taken note that there have been kind of wildly different expectations and projections of cost between the utilities at this point. So, to be clear, the staff have not really gone in and taken a look at, why, like SMECO may be only a little over $100,000, and PE today is suggesting it may be well over $1 million. Staff has not really analyze that yet, so we're not taking up any of those questions today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to the parties. Just a quick question. Is this waiver request that's being sought today an indefinite waiver, or are we saying it's a waiver that's to last for a certain period of time?
On the company's behalf, it would be an indefinite waiver unless and until we could figure out a way to work around and avoid having to do a freeze. We're going to need this waiver for as long as there's seamless moves.
Yes, that is staff's position as well. I would note that we intend to submit a revision of COMAR to address this specific issue, but we have not done that yet, and that would be submitted through Mr. Chen's working group.
Okay, so that's what I was hoping to hear, the indefinite until such time as it's addressed from COMAR perspective, because I suspect that the other utilities may have a similar challenge as Potomac Edison.
So the PHI companies requested the same waiver, but only of A and B. And so we have the PHI companies and Potomac Edison requesting this waiver. BG did not request the waiver, and Mr. Sproul will deal with the Chop Tank and SMECO filings next, but the cooperatives did not request a waiver. So it's 3 out of 6.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing as revised by staff in its comments dated June 21st, 2022. Direct the company to file clean copies of the revised tariff pages and grant the company's request for a waiver of COMAR Title 20, Subtitle 53, Chapter 4, Regulation 2A and B. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, item number 13 is updated supplier coordination tariff from the Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, Inc. to implement seamless moves.
Good morning, Mr. Sproul.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Brett Sproul on behalf of staff. Before I begin, I have one correction to the page numbers referenced in the beginning of both the 5th and the 8th pages of SMECO's comments. Both of these sections have language that states that Schedule 4 Seamless Moves is proposed as Section 3 on pages 39 and 40 of SMECO's Electric Supplier Coordination Tariff. These sections should rather say Schedule 4 Seamless Moves is proposed as Section 3 on pages 36 and 37 of SMECO's Electric Supplier Coordination Tariff. On May 18th, 2022, the Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, or SMECO, filed updated supplier coordination tariff pages with new tariff language in order to implement seamless moves for retail electric suppliers, as required by legislature in Senate Bill 79. Working with SMECO, staff has proposed and the cooperative has agreed to select changes to their initial tariff filing. These proposed changes are presented in Appendix A in staff comments. The PC44 Competitive Markets and Customer Choice Working Group submitted a report and reference consensus business plan to implement seamless moves as presented in Appendix B of staff's comments. The proposed tariff language as revised by staff is generally consistent with the reference consensus business plan. Staff has reviewed the SMECO tariff filings and processes and recommends that the Commission accept the proposed tariff as revised by staff and require SMECO to file clean copies of its tariff. I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel for the cooperative.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Mark McDougall on behalf of SMECO. SMECO agrees and has agreed with staff on the minor revisions that they have proposed for SMECO's tariff. We are here to answer any questions that you might have. I too wanted to thank Mr. Chen for his very hard work in this particular matter and commend him for the working group report.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. The same question for you. Do you know approximately what percentage of your residential customers choose?
About 2.5%. It's about 4,300 customers.
Very, very low. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, I would move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing as revised by staff in its comments dated June 17, 2022, and direct the cooperative to file clean copies of the revised tariff pages. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, item number 14 is the updated supplier coordination tariff from Chop Tank Electric Cooperative, Inc.
Thank you. Mr. Sproul, again.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Brett Sproul on behalf of staff. On May 2nd, 2022, the Chop Tank Electric Cooperative, or Chop Tank, filed updated supplier coordination tariff pages with new tariff language in order to implement seamless moves for retail electric suppliers, as required by legislature in Senate Bill 79. Working with Chop Tank, staff has proposed and the cooperative has agreed to select changes to their initial tariff filings. These proposed changes are presented in Appendix A in staff comments. The PC44 Competitive Markets and Customer Choice Working Group submitted a report and reference consensus business plan to implement seamless moves as presented in Appendix B of staff's comments. The proposed tariff language, as revised by staff, is generally consistent with the reference consensus business plan. Staff additionally notes that there are currently no Chop Tank residential or small commercial customers enrolled with a retail supplier, and no customer has been enrolled with a retail supplier since the inception of retail choice within the cooperative service territory. Staff has further reviewed the Chop Tank tariff filings and processes and recommends that the Commission accept the proposed tariff as revised by staff and require Chop Tank to file clean copies of its tariff. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we'll turn to the cooperative. Ms. Troutman, it's been several years at least since we've seen you in this room. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much. That is correct. Chop Tank does agree with the proposed changes to the tariff as staff had stated that are in Appendix A, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Troutman. I don't have any questions, although sometimes I'm confused as to what we now regulate with respect to the cooperative and what we don't. The lines are somewhat blurred. I'll turn to my colleagues. Any questions for Chop Tank? And Ms. Dahl, good to see you back here as well. I would move that we accept the tariff provisions for filing as revised by staff in its comments dated June 21st, 2022, and direct Chop Tank Electric Cooperative to file clean copies of the tariff revisions. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved.
Mr. Chairman, item number 14 consists of tariff revisions from Hagerstown Light Department reflecting the revised Maryland environmental surcharge rate.
Ms. Shea, we're back with Hagerstown again. Mr. Frittinger, do we know where he is?
Mr. Frittinger sends his apologies that he's unable to attend today. He has read and agrees with staff's comments.
Okay, that's an improvement. I know Hagerstown is always a no-show, but at least now we know they agree with you, so please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Lucy Shea on behalf of staff. On June 2nd, 2022, Hagerstown Light Department filed clean and redlined copies of its related tariff page to revise the Maryland environmental surcharge rate for fiscal year 23. Hagerstown asks that the revised surcharge, which is based on the Commission's general notice dated June 1, 2022, become effective on July 1st, 2022. Hagerstown also requests a waiver of the 30-day notice period required by the PUA Section 4-203A. The Public Utilities Article Section 7-203A1 states that the Commission shall impose an environmental surcharge per kilowatt hour of electricity distributed to retail electric customers within the state and authorize each electric company to add the full amount of the surcharge to its customer's bill. PUA Section 4-203A states that unless otherwise ordered by the Commission, a public service company must provide the Commission 30-day notice of a new rate or a change in rates. By general notice dated June 2nd, 2022, the Commission authorized Hagerstown to implement an environmental surcharge of .000150 per kilowatt hour for the 12-month period that begins July 1, 2022. The environmental surcharge reflects a reduction from the current rate of .000163 per kilowatt hour applicable during the 6-month period that began January 1, 2022. The monthly impact of the revised environmental surcharge for a residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours per month will be 15 cents, which is 1 cent lower than the rate impact of the environmental surcharge that was in effect during January 2022 through June 2022. Staff recommends that the Commission accept for filing the proposed tariff revision of Hagerstown with an effective date of July 1, 2022. Staff also recommends that the Commission waive the 30-day notice period. I welcome any questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Shea. And noting that Hagerstown Light Department is in support of your position and seeing no questions from my colleagues, I would move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of July 1st, 2022, and grant the municipality their request for a waiver of the 30-day notice period required by Public Utilities Article Section 4-203. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved.
Mr. Chairman, item number 16 also consists of tariff revisions reflecting the revised Maryland environmental surcharge rate from the Potomac Edison Company.
Ms. Alexander, this is your first time at the podium, I believe. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Tanika Alexander on behalf of staff. On June 13, 2022, Potomac Edison filed clean and red line copies of its related tariff page to reflect the revised Maryland environmental surcharge rate of .000150 per kilowatt hour for fiscal year 2023, approved by the Commission in its June 1, 2022 general notice. The revised rate of .000150 reflects an increase from the current rate of 0.000147 kilowatt hour. The monthly rate impact of the fiscal year 23 environmental surcharge for a residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours per month will be a charge of 15 cents per kilowatt hour, which results in no monthly change when rounded from the surcharge that was in effect July 2021 through June 2022. Staff has determined that the environmental surcharge rate reflected in the revised tariff page complies with the Commission's June 1, 2022 fiscal year 23 environmental surcharge factor general notice. Therefore, staff recommends that the Commission accept for filing the proposed tariff revision of Potomac Edison with an effective date of July 1, 2022, and that the Commission waive the 30-day notice period required by Public Utilities Article Section 4-203A. I am available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. We'll return to Mr. Trout.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Jeffrey Trout, still for the Potomac Edison Company. And we agree with staff and have no additional presentation. I will attempt to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. I would do my best to channel Commissioner O'Donnell and haze Ms. Alexander, but her recitation was very clear, and I do not have any questions for either counsel, and I don't see any from my colleagues either, so I would move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of July 1st, 2022, and grant the company's request for a waiver of the 30-day notice period as required by Public Utilities Article Section 4-203. The vote begins with Commissioner Bubar.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved. Before we conclude today, we do have a scheduling note. We will have a hearing at 11:30 a.m. this morning in docket number RM76 with respect to cybersecurity regulations. With that, today's hearing is adjourned.